So I came up against a ton of resistance, so many no's, so many conversations of saying, if you really want your patients to have access to this facility, they need to have a virtual component. Fortify my positive mindset was to get through those tough times of being told no. And I think a lot of other entrepreneurs in the space of healthcare in general have that shared experience of being like,
welcome to From Stress to Success, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really excited to introduce you to a very special guest, a very important person to me. The man sitting with me today is the co-founder of FRANSiS, which may have hooked you up into who he is. He's a mental health advocate, positivity soldier, love that title, a podcast host, and he also helps me co-host the Let's Discuss podcast. The man is none other than Keenan Hart. Keenan, welcome so much to the studio, my friend.
Freeman, super excited to be here today and to have this type of conversation. So I'm really excited to see where this one goes for us. But just want to say thank you so much for exposing me to your audience. You know, you do such amazing work out here that it's always a pleasure to be able to collaborate with you on this kind of stuff. So excited to get into it.
Thanks, brother. You bring an interesting perspective, I think, to this, and people listening to this in particular, when we talk about challenges that come up in entrepreneurship and in our careers and in our lives, which is a lot of what we cover here on this show. And that's, I think you're going to give a lot of perspective to that. So I'm really excited for, not to put you on the spot, but the value that you're going to bring us today.
Let's see if I can do it for you, man.
All right. So the first thing that I was thinking about when I was like, I'm going to have Keenan on, what am I going to chat to him about? Because we talk a lot, but what we haven't talked about is way back when you started FRANSiS, telehealth was not a thing.
Right.
So take us back to like what was going on in Keenan's brain when you went, I'm going to start a telehealth company that's going to be around texting people. What was going on?
Yeah. So there's something that's really important to recognize is the difference between telemedicine and telehealth, right? When I got started in 2014, we were thinking about the challenges that people have in accessing mental health professionals, right? Their therapists, their counselors. Now, because I'm based in Las Vegas, I'm in a big state of desert, right? People think about Nevada in general as Las Vegas in the south and the biggest little town in the world, which is Reno, Nevada in the north, right? But there's hundreds of miles in between those two cities. And in our state, we've got small populations of people who live in a town of 1,800, of 2,300, of 5,600, but they're 3.5 hours away from the huge metropolitan cities. And so when we were really figuring out how we could have an impact in our communities, we started thinking about using technology in all of its different forms to be able to allow people to access a trusted mental health provider. And what that meant for us was not just thinking about telemedicine and doing the video interactions, but how do we use all the other pieces of technology that people have when it comes to accessing trusted advice from a mental health professional? And from my perspective, right, back in 2014, everybody was inventing apps. Everybody was talking about big hardware systems that you needed to participate in telehealth, but they were really talking about telemedicine, the exchange of time for services, right? Super billable motivation on the back end because a provider in healthcare in general wants to make sure they're getting paid for their time. But there are so many gaps that happen in that delivery of care. One of which is when I'm not in front of my therapist or counselor, or I'm not in the environment of mental health improvement, often these things fall by the wayside, right? Life gets busy again. I've got the triggers in my environment, the stresses, the job complexities, all that kind of stuff that we deal with. And often just the telemedicine billable interaction was something that needed enhancement. And so I started thinking about what pieces of technology can I get people to consistently use that isn't going to mean you have to go download a new app. And the one thing that we continued to find was no matter what demographic of people we engaged with, if that was from underserved communities, if those were people going through, a behavioral health detox process because they're trying to kick drugs or kick alcohol, what type of technology do these people have? And often they always had a cell phone and they always were on that thing texting back and forth. So we started thinking about how do we weaponize this communication channel that everybody uses in their common everyday life for mental health improvement. And that's kind of where FRANSiS really got its start of how do we use technology, but more importantly, weaponize text messages to be able to meet people where they are on a daily basis. And that's kind of how we got our start.
I love that. What's interesting is you were in there, you'd said that you guys were already trying to figure out how you could impact communities and stuff like that. So let's back up a step there. And where does that come from? Where does that, like, how do we impact the people around us? Where does one even start to go down that road?
I think that experience for me came from a lot of lived experience. So when I was early in my days, I was finding that there were communities of people who were underserved, but more importantly, their perception of how healthcare in their lives was being predefined by the negative experiences often that people have. And when you think about a fully integrated, supportive community of people, we want to be able to access resources on our terms. But healthcare in general has always been, we're going to hold down our brick and mortar location. You're going to drive the 3.5, 4, 5 hours to get to us. And that's how we are going to be able to serve our community. You come to us. And as
Mm.
I started thinking about back in 2014, how technology was going to play a role in cutting down so many of the travel obligations, but also the time obligations that we had, I started thinking about technology really being the medium between where we are right now and where we want to go. And so when I started thinking about the community, I was thinking about how we use technology to create a more inclusive, supportive perspective
Hmm.
of healthcare in general. And that's why we really started with the community aspect.
I love that. I love that you've community focused. You said, here's a problem, here's a solution that we're already interacting with. How do we pair these two things? That
Yeah.
shows that entrepreneur brain that is immediately like problem, solution. How do I pair them?
Yeah,
I
and,
love
like,
that.
to kinda go back a little bit, Freeman, community in healthcare is something that a lot of people don't think about, especially in the mental and behavioral health space. There are so many community providers, community organizations that really create a comprehensive way to support a client. So if I talk about behavioral health, and I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the detox process of behavioral health, right? If I'm going into a detox program, those people are very specialized at helping me detox and get off of whatever I'm trying to kick. But often, when it comes to peer support, case management, there are other people in the community that kind of fill those gaps of service. And so, naturally, when I think about community in general, it's all of us together that are trying to create a cohesive, I would say, supportive network to be able to support people through their care journey.
Mm. Which you see a lot of other large organizations doing. Alcoholics Anonymous, obviously, very big on their community aspect. It's what makes them so beneficial and have such success rates.
Absolutely.
Is it that drive they put forward to community? What's interesting as well is you were putting through something that's fairly innovative at the time, anyways. I mean, now people would be like, yeah, of course, you're going to do that. But then it was fairly innovated. Were you seeing pushback from the people in the medical community? And like, if so, what did that look like, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, and I think this is kind of where my fortitude for positivity, if you guys follow me on social media anywhere, I'm always talking about mindset. I'm always talking about positivity and how we kind of cultivate a more conducive mindset to be successful. And so when I first got started in the telehealth space, I was like, sitting from my unique place in history, I'm born in 1990. I've seen how technology has exploded in my lifetime, right? And I see naturally that this is the next step around the corner. But healthcare in general, and nothing against the space, but healthcare has been operated pretty much the same way for the last almost 100 years, right? We see the same healthcare model being executed time after time again, and innovation is slow. And so, even though I saw the next step of healthcare tech being telehealth and telemedicine, going into some of these hospital systems and dealing with and meeting with the leaders of these different organizations, they had come from a place in the past where this wasn't something we did. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't really know if this is going to be something that's going to happen in the future. So I came up against a ton of resistance, so many no's, so many conversations of saying, if you really want your patients to have access to this facility, they need to have a virtual component. But because it was uncharted territory, nobody really believed in it. And to be very transparent with you, that's kind of why I had to fortify my positive mindset, was to get through those tough times of being told no. And I think a lot of other entrepreneurs in the space of healthcare in general have that shared experience of being like, this is the answer. But if you don't have an audience that's ready to believe it, it can be incredibly frustrating, man. Oh my gosh, I can't even begin to tell you about it.
So what's interesting is that you were doing twofold. You were using that positive messaging outwards to support who you are as a person and what you believe in, but also for yourself as well, which is so fascinating because obviously one of the easiest ways to learn something is to teach it. So that's what you were actively taking part in by doing
Ab-
so.
Absolutely. And you and I, in different episodes that we've collaborated on together, kind of talk about this. So, the primary reason that we started the telehealth business, right, back in 2014 was to create that connectivity. And as I was going through the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations of being told no and told no and told no, I found myself in a really dark place. So in
Hmm.
2017, the new year is starting, and we had just been told no by an organization that led us down the path in healthcare of like, let's meet with the team, let's do this, put a scope of work together, give us a proposal. Actually, you know what? Our budget isn't going to fit this year, so why don't you come back next year? Right? And this is in December. And it's like, okay, so that's a calendar year out. So, how do I start programming and teaching myself to be more positive? So, what I
Mm.
did was I turned internally and started saying, okay, Keenan, what is something that I know I can control? So every single day, I hopped on Instagram and made a small story in the morning. It was like, hey guys, it's day one today. And you have a lot of experience with this in your 365 days of positivity. It's day one of positivity. I'm going to have a great day today. I'm just going to try and make a small step forward for myself. Did that consistently. And when I got to day 80, day 240, day 360, as long as I went through that journey, I had so many people coming out of the woodwork and saying, hey, man, I don't know if you know this, but your messages of positivity are something that I look forward to every single morning when I wake up. Or I always make
Mm.
sure I go back to your story and like digest and consume your story because it's a boost that I need. And often I don't find that in the people who I engage with every single day. And so something I started teaching myself had a multiplicative impact on the people around me. And that was when my radar started to go off about like, okay, I think more people need these messages of positivity, encouragement, support, or just a mental wellness tip, but often we don't have a place to access them. And so that was kind of the early seeding of figuring out how FRANSiS was going to be so powerful. And the rest just kind of took itself as time kind of, made it more readily available and more necessary as we got into the future.
It's so neat that by helping yourself and doing something that you were like, I need this to do this to help me through this dark time, like you just said, you unlock sort of that next thing in your business path. And I think that that's something that people need to be aware of. If you're listening now, that if you're struggling with something, turn inward, look at yourself, solve your problem, and oftentimes you'll get a solution for another problem as well. And it's cool that that's directly what happened with you.
Exactly.
So let's go back to 2017, because you said you'd been in business for 3 years at that point in time, and things were pretty rough. You had $38 in your bank account. Things were looking bad. How useful was those posts you were doing every day to get you through? What else got you through those? I'm assuming those were probably 3 challenging years. Kind of what was getting you through that?
Well, I was very lucky because my father had always been an entrepreneur my entire life. Like ever since I was born, I just remember my dad having that mentality of like, you can go figure these things out yourself. And one thing that he always used to tell me and my family was like, this too shall pass.
Mm.
And as I was going through those really tough times, I had to naturally kind of put myself in the perspective of these days that are super rough right now are going to be building blocks for my story in the future when everybody else catches on. And they're going to make the times where I have self doubt, when I feel like my self worth is at an ultimate low, so much more valuable because I know that I'm going to stick through these things. And as I was going through that process of putting out those positive messages, I consistently kind of think about Freeman like those honestly were some of my happiest days because I was in control of what I could control. And often that was all that I could really ask for in those moments.
Mm.
So when I had $38 in the bank account, I was like, okay, I have to reframe this as like, if I'm happy now and I can still have an impact on the people that I want to engage with every single day, then obviously the future is going to be so much brighter. And I can't wait for those days to come. But I'm okay sitting in this season right now because I know it's necessary to get to the next step.
What would you say to people who, we've both gone through this journey of doing a positive thing, regardless of sort of not the impact that it's having necessarily, but regardless of, regardless of the impact that happens, sort of, it's something that we deemed was important, so we just did it because we thought people needed it. Obviously, with that comes this level of building where you don't get kind of feedback right away or something like that. For anybody who's out there listening right now who is thinking about doing something positive in their community, online, anywhere, and it's going, I don't know if I should. Like, what would you say to those people if you could talk directly to them right now?
I would ask you, what is the motivation for you doing what you want to do? I think often, and I go back to this analogy that I often tell myself is like when we're asked or we're asking of the universe to make us a more positive person, often we are not given the mindset of a positive person, but we're given opportunities to practice being that positive person. And so that was kind of my mindset back in the day of like, okay, if I want to be this person for others and I realize how impactful it is, then obviously it's important for me to do the work right now, because I'm never going to get to the next place unless I go through this season of hardship. I like how Alex Hormozy, if you guys haven't heard of him, go check him out. He's all over social media these days. But he's like, often people want to skip the Rocky cutscene, the scene where we're punching the meat in the locker, when we're running by ourselves, when we're waking up, when we're having all those moments of self-doubt, when we don't feel like we're going to get there. And those moments are the things that build the foundation for our success in the future. And often we want to skip past that part. You know what I mean? And like the Rocky cutscene is just such a valuable part of your story as you're trying to do something positive for other people. But you can't forget that that's part of the season or the chapter of your story that you're writing. And it's just so much more valuable long term.
It's that cost of doing it in a way, right? I know Alex Harmley talks about that as well, right? It all comes with a cost. And I feel like that's part of the cost of kind of having that impact. I want to dive into something interesting as well in your past. You were big into sports. What did sports teach you about entrepreneurship?
That's a really good question. I've never been asked this on a podcast. So I'm going to have to kind of really be intentional on how I ask this. The one thing that I learned from sports was the preparation that you do whenever nobody else is watching is what helps you perform on the biggest stage. You know what I mean? If you're not putting in the work, and I constantly go back to my guy right here, Kobe, right? He talks about the amount of work that it takes to be done when nobody else is watching, right? I think about the famous saying of like, you weren't in the gym shooting with me, so why are you going to be here with me now? You know what I mean? And I think sports just consistently will always teach you that if you want to be successful, it's all about the time that you're putting in when nobody else is watching that gives you the ability to show up as your best self when everybody is. And that's something that I think entrepreneurship, but just in general in life, needs to be taken into account a little bit more often. It's okay to shine on the big stage, but often we don't really give the credit to the work that people do in the shadows when nobody else is watching that really put that person into that position to be successful.
Yeah, and it's funny because we want to shine on that stage, but we don't want to put the work in the shadows. And I think that's part of what a lot of people talk about, which is learning to love that process of putting the work in the shadows. Because if you don't, you're not going to do it consistently, which means when it's your time to step up onto that stage, you're not going to perform the way you're supposed to, right?
And why do you think, Freeman, everybody who's super successful always says that?
Yeah.
Why do they continue to try and beat that into our head of like, you have to be in love with the process. You have to fall in love with the days where you're doing work and you don't get the reward to make the most rewarding days exactly that. The days that we talk about, you know what I mean? I hear Kobe talk about it. I hear Gary Vaynerchuk talk about it. I hear Alex Hormozy talk about it. And it's like that saying of like, you know, money doesn't buy happiness, but everybody wants to try it themselves. And it's like, unless you're willing, unless you're willing to actually do the work and go through the process, you're never going to fall in love with the end result because it's not going to be worth it for you.
Yeah, it's something that I learned when I first started on these journey of my own with reading and listening to autobiographies. I know like Will Smith's autobiography was the first one that clicks in my brain. And that was that lesson to me to be like, oh, these people they've done the work in the shadows. And those autobiographies often let you see that work in the shadows. And then you go, okay, it's not hapstance. It's not the silver spoon. It's hard work. It's dedication. It's consistency. And it's falling in love with a reason that lets you be consistent, which I think is so interesting that you found I need to make a positive impact on the world. How can I do so? Telehealth, all these things. And you just kept building, continually chasing what you often call that North Star. Right.
Yeah.
So could you if you were to boil your North Star down into a sentence or two, what is your North Star? What is your driving force?
I want to be someone who other people will talk about when my time is gone and be like, dude, that guy had a huge impact on my life. And in today's world of entrepreneurship and all the social media glitz and the glam and all that kind of stuff, everybody, in my opinion, seems to be chasing a definition of success that is defined by somebody else. You need to make $100,000 a month. I can't tell you how many people and how many ads I've seen for, if you want to have a passive income job and make $10,000 a month, this is all you have to do. But what we're not recognizing is that we are in the pursuit of what somebody else says is going to make us happy, does not make us happy. And so when I look around at the people around me, and this is why you and I connected so well, is because there are far and few in between people who are willing to stand up and be that voice of optimism that people need. So many people are out here being negative, talking about reaction channels and like, how stupid did this person look and how bad did that? And like, that's so embarrassing. Yet nobody's willing to be the person in everybody else's life who they need to pick them up and give them that message of encouragement that we all need. And so if I can create a business model that is about spreading awareness around positivity, mental health, and all the challenges that I've seen other people in my family struggle with for years, and I could be the person, or at least behind a brand that is that person or that thing for other people, then that's something that I know I can fall in love with the process for. But also, when that impact is truly realized someday, I'll recognize that I was putting my eggs in the right basket. And that's something that I can truly be proud of.
Why is that so important to you?
Well, to be very transparent with you, and it makes me kind of emotional on where I just felt that feeling, but it's like, dude, I came from a family of biracial background, African American dad, white mother. Naturally, when I think about mental health, I think about all of the men from my father's side of the family that never even had an opportunity to think about the things that I prioritize today. My great grandfather was a sharecropper in Arkansas. This man sacrificed his entire life to be able to provide for his family, to have an opportunity to have a life that he dreamed of. My grandfather was born in the 1930s in a very discriminatory America and had to deal with the challenges of racism and not even be giving a shot because of the color of his skin. My father was the next generation of that, born in 1961, who had an opportunity to make something for himself and became an entrepreneur and designed a lifestyle for himself. And now the things that I benefit from that other men could never even have imagined. And now, if I think about the shoulders of the men that I stand on, what is the next role? Is it to go out and try and get super paid like so many people chase? That's one path. But I also know that if I can be somebody who the previous men can be proud of because I'm having the conversations, I'm willing to talk about the messages and the things that truly challenge us in our family history, and I can let other people participate in those things, that's something that I can be proud of. And that's why it's just so important to me.
That concept, the standing on the shoulders of those who've come before you, is such a valuable concept that I think we often lose sight of in this day and age. Being aware of what is the, for lack of a better term, legacy that we're leaving behind. Why are we leaving it behind? And what will it mean to those who look back at it, right? And I think that that's kind of where you're going with this, right? Is that you want people to look back and go, you know what? Like, Keenan did these things and he put these things in place so now that I can go and step bigger. It's the whole planting seeds to sit under the shade of a tree that you're never gonna see, right?
Exactly right. And that's where the men who have come before me have plowed the land. They first of all acquired the land, right? Then we had some people who hoed the land and made sure that it was fertile. Then we had other people who started like planting our first seeds. Then we realized in my generation that I have an opportunity to have a bigger impact because of the work that people have done behind me. And I think about myself as like, I have this conversation with my dad all the time, and he's like, we've come so far as a family. We've accomplished so much as the men of our lineage. And I look at that responsibility as being one that weighs heavy for me. I'm not going to be, excuse my language, the person who kind of just like screws off the gifts that I've been given to live this life that I have today. And I feel like I would just be doing all the people in the future that will come after me a disservice by not trying to push it as hard as I possibly can while I have the time to do it.
While you were saying that, what's interesting is I was thinking about the whole metaphor we just kind of laid out there, right? The people behind you are sowing the seeds and plowing the soil and kind of nurturing that space, which means that if that hadn't happened, you couldn't be where you are and you couldn't have planted the large oak tree. And this is another quote that I just recently landed on where, like, oak trees grow strongest, in strong blowing winds, essentially, right? It's that resistance that makes them grow strong. It's the effort and the blood, sweat, and tears that people have put in before you that have gotten you to where you are. And if they had had an easy life, or have taken the easy path, even, right? That, again, to kind of lean into this whole concept of what I'm very big proponent on, is that hardship creates the greatness that now you can hopefully expand upon.
And I think that expansion for me is beyond sacrifice of labor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where my family came from. We came from a history of people who traded their time and their physical ability to execute in laborious activities as a way to get forward, right? And now that I look at my responsibility of being where I'm at in history, the next unlock for my family lineage is shedding some of those scars and the negative experiences, and more importantly, the mindset that limits us to be the best version of ourselves. And if I can start really thinking about the next layer, or the next, I would say, frontier of how the Hart lineage is going to expand, it's going to be having a positive mindset. It's going to be the person who doesn't refer back to the traumatic stories that we've all been through, but looks at the future as being something that can be prosperous for all of us. And I want to be that foundation that kind of pushes us to the next level.
Yeah, I love that. Let's play an interesting game here that I think is it's very unique for the way that we know each other now, actually. So, for those of you who are unaware, we met almost a year ago, I'd say now at this point in time on LinkedIn, and Keenan was actually the first guest I had on my original podcast, which was called The Cup of Positivity, named very much so because of Keenan's cup, which is literally a cup of positivity.
Yep.
You may have seen it on some of the other episodes we've done together.
Yep.
What's really interesting, let's go find it right now. There it is.
Yep. Positivity, please.
So that's was one of the things that made that podcast, which has then grown into this podcast, and it's neat to look back and follow the breadcrumbs. What I'm going to show up on the screen here is really interesting, and if you're watching, you'll see this. If you're not watching, listen to audio. I'll try to describe it here in a moment. This screenshot right here is from the first podcast that me and Keenan sat down and did together in October, I think, of 2020. This I'll try to briefly give an audio description for anybody looking. The studio doesn't look nearly like it does now. It's just an awful grade in the background. There's this bad banner. I've got a disorganized background. Keenan's, I don't know where his hat is because it clearly didn't exist in these photos. There's no interesting lighting. It's not great. The reason I want to show that image for people, though, is to show like this is what it looks like now, and I have no idea what it's going to look like in the future, but that's what it did look like. The question I have for you now, Keenan, is what's changed from the gentleman in that picture to the person sitting in front of me now?
The only thing that has changed is the tactics in which I'm executing. So earlier you had mentioned something that was important, is we would not be where we are today if those people hadn't done what they had done, right? And I think it goes back to the analogy of like everybody wants the big payoff, but nobody's willing to go through the rocky cutscene to get there. And I know because you and I have spent so much time doing what we're doing right now that we've built on the stairs of our experience that have given us the opportunity to create a better produced podcast for everybody today. But if we wouldn't have been in those original situations with our hats and no hat for Keenan and just like trying to figure it out, we never would have made it. I think I was listening actually to Alex Ramosi because we talked about him earlier today. And he was talking about when he first started on his content journey. He was meeting with a video editor and he said to the guy, I want to make videos for the next 3 years. And if I have 1 million subscribers by then, I'll be happy because I know I'll be closer to where I'm trying to get to than where I am right now. And it's the willingness to just put in the work without recognizing that there needs to be a finish line that I need to cross today is what puts us in this situation. Because all of the experiences that you and I have had about editing and content creation and creating a message for people to connect with us on important topics like mental health has been all of the foundation that we've been able to build up to this day. And it's so cool to be able to kind of look back at that stuff with you, Freeman, because it's like that was not that long ago, but it feels like it was forever ago. You know what I mean?
I completely agree. I pulled the screenshot up and I got to look at it again because this does feel like a decade ago, like for the progress that I know we've each made. I know that picture just is, it seems like I completely agree. I feel like a slightly different person, but I like the way you said it. It's like we had to walk those stages. What's neat is we've kind of walked some stages now of kind of how you got to where you are, some of the roadblocks you kind of hit and how you got past them and why you kept pushing through them. Where are you going? Let's do this in a two-part. Where's Keenan going? What's in the future for Keenan and what's in the future for FRANSiS? Do those pair up? What's it look like?
I would say that those two things are synonymous because, this might get a little bit of flack for everybody out there, but I identify heavily with my business. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Hmm.
I truly love what I do, and this has become an integral part of why I wake up every single day. You know what I mean? There's always these conversations about like work life balance and everything that you should be doing. And I think a lot of those conversations, very transparently, are for people who are not enthralled with what they're trying to build. You know, I am so happy to be in this rocky cutscene of just like building my business and building myself to be a better executor of my business that I'm not interested in really trying to separate the two. Of course, there's going to be other elements like having a child, which Freeman just had. And those are life adversities and the gifts that we're given that take us in different paths that we wouldn't be able to anticipate. I'm not at that stage right now. And so, what I look at, let's just break this down to the next year. I'm going to be working my tail off to create as much awareness about what we're trying to do at FRANSiS. And I think as part of that process, I'm going to continue to develop into the person that I need to be able to continue to feel more confident on camera, to be able to get more creative about my content ideas, to feel more confident in myself, to get up on a stage and speak to people about my message. And I really look at those two things as running parallel in each other,
Hmm.
because this is something that I'm just so passionate about, and I don't see myself ever giving this up because of all the reasons of what we talked about today.
Yeah. What I like about that is you didn't give me a hard, like, I'm going to have 100,000 subscribers to my YouTube channel and Francis is going to, there was no numbers. There wasn't even any hard targets. It was, I'm going to keep pushing the things that I find important.
Exactly.
And I think that's a huge lesson that people need to be aware of. When you are only focused on sort of your next main mission and goal and milestone, and you're not looking at that in a more holistic approach, that is a much harder grind than I think what you've just described.
And I think a big part of that is really just kind of establishing a longer time horizon for myself. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if I'm trying to work to make $10,000 in the next month, I'm going to be making certain types of decisions that are going to get me there. But if I'm trying to really build the brand and have the impact that I'm looking at, this is not something that has an end in mind. This is something that is going to be long lasting and is going to be built upon by the people who are going to come after me. If those are my friends, if those are collaborations like what we're doing right now, if those are people that come across my message and want to become a part of the team, those are the things that I look at is like long-term growth and exponential impact. Is not something that I can truly measure because we never know what opportunities are going to present themselves, but I will guarantee that I will be ready to take advantage of them when they do pop up.
You mentioned something in there, and this is an interesting thought that I've been thinking of recently. So I'm curious on how you work through these things. We often are told as entrepreneurs that we have to be aware of opportunities, look for them, find them, seek them out, even cultivate them. When is an opportunity? When do you turn around from an opportunity? Is there a point for you? Like, how do you decide what's an opportunity and what's maybe a distraction?
I think I'm going to use a word very intentionally here, and that is strategy, right? People often think about strategy as like when this type of opportunity presents itself, this is what we're going to take advantage of. But the flip side of strategy is also recognizing what you're not going to do, right? I think answering the question of what I am not going to do is giving me a lot more confidence to march into the future and recognize that opportunities are going to pop up and I'll know when they're right in the future. Like as an entrepreneur, I think we are always trying to chasing, like you said multiple times today, that next finish line, the next objective that we're trying to get to. And along the way, there are going to be many distractions that pop up, one-off opportunities. Should we do this? What if we built this product? What if we did this? And in our previous conversations, we have always talked about identifying what that North Star is that we mentioned today, right? And as long as I'm on line with that North Star, I realize that I'm going to have to say no to more things and I'm going to have to say yes to,
Mm-hmm.
because it is the consistent work over a long enough time horizon that gives you the results. It's not the let me go do this for 20 minutes and then switch and then go do this and then go do this and then go do this. If I continue to, you know, disassociate my effort over multiple tasks, I'm never going to be the person who's as efficient as I want to be when the opportunity does pop up. And that's just a big part of, you know, how I've been trying to reframe strategy in my mind of not realizing what I'm going to take advantage of, but the things I will say no to, which will keep me on that path, which I think are more important.
Mm-hmm. As far as staying on that path, recognizing that North Star, keeping positive, doing all those things, a question I always love to ask people, and interestingly enough, I should have pulled it up now that I'm saying this. I probably asked you in that first episode of A Cup of Positivity, but what are 3 things you do on a daily to make sure that you are showing up the way you show up, that you are this positive person, that you have this energy, and that you're building this very important sort of foundation for the future generations?
The biggest thing that I've been learning over the last couple of years is self-care is huge for me. When I do not take care of myself first, I find that I'm very much able to show up as a lesser version of myself for other people. And when I cheat myself out of that self-care element of being able to disconnect from work, right? Being able to, sometimes pull myself away so I can recharge is super important. But the other thing that I normally do on a daily basis is a practice that I call 3 wins. And this is super important for me. So every single night, I will hop into my journal and I'll write 3 wins down from the day. Okay. And then I'll also write what would make 3 wins for tomorrow. And so
Mm.
when I consistently do this on a daily basis, and I don't have my journal in front of me, but when you're doing this for a week, for a month, for 2, 3 months on end, you start waking up in the morning and realizing that you have a gigantic list of things that you are appreciative for and you have gratitude for in those moments. And it's very difficult for me to get myself into that mindset of woe me or pity me when I have a documented list of all the things that I'm appreciative for. That has been something that is a super small element in my life, but continues to compound on a daily basis and kind of really keeps pushing me in the right direction. So when I ever have those moments of doubt or those moments of not wanting to show up as my best self, it's an easy way for me to reference back to all the stuff that's going on for me rather than naturally our brain's ability to look at the stuff that's not going right.
Yeah, to look at the negative. So looking after yourself, I know that you're that self development stuff. You're big on your personal fitness and all that fun stuff. You journal,
Hmm.
every night to write these things down. Is there a third thing that is consistent that you think every day that helps you,
I
or
kind
that
of
you
always
wish maybe could be consistent?
something that I wish could be more consistent was this is very transparent is I would say deploying a little bit of a present mindset. You know, I really find it difficult sometimes to be present with all the other stuff that's going on, all the other kind of stuff that we want to accomplish. So I'm always thinking into the future. But the one thing that has been challenged in my life over the last couple of years is time. My father was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2021 and just actually went this last Monday to his 1 year like anniversary after his radiation treatment, all that kind of stuff. And one thing that my father continues to say to me is like, our time is not guaranteed. And I wish I was able to deploy that sense of being present intentionally a little bit more because it would give me just a more grounded perspective of like, once again, the season that I'm in and how lucky I am to be here instead of getting myself in a mindset where I'm too far in the future or too far in the past. Like right now really is a gift. And I really want to
Mm.
practice in being a little bit more intentional with that, perspective of presence.
Do you meditate?
I do
Have you
meditate.
tried?
I need
Hmm.
to do it more often though. Back in
It's interesting.
24
Yeah.
back in 2014, one of my buddies introduced me to Headspace for the first time, and I really started thinking about how I could meditate to be a little bit more present, and that is definitely something that I need to start integrating back into my process, but I even fall trapped to the rule of, like, I don't have enough time to meditate today, even if it's for 10, 15 minutes, right? And I think so many of us fall trapped to that, but meditating in itself is one of the most freeing uncoupling activities that I've been able to discover. It's even better than being in the gym because if I have an
Hmm.
opportunity to sit with myself, it naturally brings in that sense of presence that I'm looking for. It naturally brings that sense of perspective that I'm always asking for. But I need to do a better job of putting in the work on a daily basis to do those things.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that cause when you were saying that, I just remember Jay Shetty. I was listening to him a couple days ago, and he mentioned that meditation is one of the things that centers the mind and the body and brings you all back to present. And that's why he thinks it's so important. And then, interesting enough, I was in a different podcast with a different meditator yesterday, and he said that a lot of people have that same issue that you have. Oh, but I could spend that time doing something else. And he's like, there's a reason that so many very successful business people put meditation on the top of their list. Steve Jobs, all these people, Mark Zuckerberg, go and do these meditative practices. And there's a reason. It buys you more than the time that you spend doing it, I suppose. So
Absolutely.
it's something that
Absolutely.
I'm in the same boat. I need to do it more. So maybe that's something we can challenge each other on, is to make sure that we're meditating.
We can do that. We can do that. I'm down with that. I'll be your accountability partner if you'll be mine.
Sweet. I'll message you. I'll be like, Keenan, you meditated yet today?
Yeah, exactly.
You'd be like, no. I'll be like, well, you should.
Yeah.
I love it. One of the other important questions I like to ask people when they come on here is, and you've kind of answered it, but I'd like you to kind of give us maybe a nice summary of what it looks like. But success. What does being successful look like to you?
This is a really good question. And this is success, in my opinion, is really a worldview. I have been forced to reshape my worldview many times. As an early entrepreneur in those early days, when I was going through it and I needed to like reframe a positive mindset for myself, I was really trying to fortify the fact of like, I have everything I need to be happy now. Right. But eventually, to be very transparent, when you're around other people who are successful in the terminology of social media, people are making more money than you, they've got nicer cars than you, they go to nicer places than you, they can do more stuff than you. Naturally, I started to trying to subconsciously chase some of that stuff. And the only way that I've been able to reframe my worldview once again was by obtaining those things: the car,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of money, the ability to go out and do the kind of stuff. And then I realized that once again, I was chasing somebody else's definition of what success was. And it was so unfulfilling for me that it really kind of scared me. So in the recent last year, calendar year, I'd say, I saved up enough money and I was able to get a Tesla, right? And for years, Freeman and everybody else who was listening, I put that thing as like the pinnacle. I was like, once I get
Mm.
this, I'm gonna be happy. Oh my God, it's gonna be so nice.
Now I'm Elon Musk.
Now I'm Elon, right? I mean, who's Elon? Because I'm here, I'm already driving the thing, so it's like I might as well have it. But once I obtained that thing, that was the last trigger that I can reference today that kind of helped me reshape that worldview once again. That
Mm.
version of success was something that I very transparently started thinking about. Like, did I waste all the time, all the money, all those late nights trying to chase this object? And now, when I think about success, and I've been really trying to be intentional about how I reshape this for myself, success for me is going back to all the things that I talked about earlier. It's being willing to put in the work and do justice by the people that I stand on top of today, their shoulders, to be able to push us forward as a generation of heart men in the future. And so that's why I consistently try and go back to that North Star or that why that we talked about today, because at the end of the day, it's not the things that we have, it's not the money that we spent, but it's the way that we make people feel how they'll remember us. You know what I mean? Like the clubs, the dollars, the car you drove, the watch you had, all that stuff was cool in the moment. But when people remember you, they're going to remember you for the way that you made them feel.
Mm.
And that is kind of the horizon unlock that I'm trying to really push myself towards, is like, if I can have the positive impact that I want, then everything else should kind of fall in line with it, because I'm really kind of aligning with my purpose first and everything else should backfill behind it. And if it doesn't happen, then I've already got the stuff that I've always chased and I realize that it's not as great as people say it is, you know? And
Yeah.
so I'm really trying to reframe that version of success, but it's a constant everyday action for me. And it's
Mm.
really challenging, to be honest with you.
I like that. What you said in there in the middle is I think is so powerful that people remember the way you made them feel, not the things that you bought them or the things that you bought yourself, right? I think that's really important. People need to really remember that. You write it down on whatever piece of paper you have near you. I don't care if it's on your fridge, just write that down. It's important. Last thing, if you could give people one piece of advice, one little lesson that helps them achieve whatever their success looks like and helps them push through obstacles, like what's that one single lesson?
Do the work that you need to do to make yourself happy. And I want to kind
Mm.
of leave a pregnant pause there, because I think everybody intuitively knows what will make them truly happy. And we know the work that we have to do to get from here to there. But often we don't do the work because we're afraid of what other people think, what other people are going to say, what happens if I fail. And I really continue to try and put myself in the mindset of like, 90-year-old Keenan, what type of things are we going to regret? And I guarantee
Mm.
you it's going to be the times where you doubted yourself. It's going to be the times when you listen to other people. It's going to be the times when you let other people's priorities and perspectives sway yours. Because when we get older, we often don't think about the things that we did as being the things that we regret, but it's often the things that we didn't. And over the last couple of years, I've really had tough conversations with myself where I continue to ask myself, what would have happened if I would have?
Mm.
What would have happened if I would have gone all in? What would happen if I would have done the things that I knew that I wanted to do? And now I have to look back at them with hindsight being 2020 and being like, dude, you should have just went after it. If you would have
Should
just
just chased
believed
it.
in yourself, you could have done it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now you're a year and a half, 2 months, 6 months, 3, 4 years behind, and you still recognize the work that you should have been doing to make yourself happy. And I just don't want to have those type of conversations with myself anymore. So I'm trying to constantly fight for that version of myself that's in the future, that's not going to have those regrets next to me.
That's powerful. I think that because you're probably aware of this, you keep having those conversations a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, and you're like, why am I still having this conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And that sucks.
It does.
That
And
sucks
like
a
at the end of
lot.
the day, like I just don't like looking myself in the mirror and being like, you could have
do
done
that
it. And
thing.
like having a knock on the screen and be like, dude, when are you going to wake up, man? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like everything that you wanted was in your grasp, or at least was a possibility if you just would have applied yourself. And I just look around at the men around me today. And once again, going back to the conversation we had about my grandfather, great grandfather, and father, these men didn't even have the opportunity. They didn't even have the choice to be like, well, I don't know if I believe in myself enough to go chase that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, dude, you have such
Just
a
that sentence,
luxury.
the fact that you can say that sentence right now,
Yeah.
right, is, I think, quite, that really nails it, doesn't it? The fact that you can go, well, I don't know if, I don't know if I even have the ability within me to chase that opportunity. For them, it was like, that opportunity wasn't even there. It was like, how do I make enough money to feed my family? How do I support myself? How do I just make it so I can even have a next generation of the Hart family, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, that's really, really powerful. And I hope people listening will sit with that. Please do. I think that's really important. Keenan, I want to thank you as a friend, but also as a curator of amazing content for what you're doing, for the energy you're putting out in the world, for the positive messages, what you're doing for people with both FRANSiS and what you're doing on your personal side. I think it's really incredible. I'm hoping that people, when they listen to this, will go and follow what you're doing elsewhere, because it's amazing. It's very inspiring. So thank you for inspiring me and keeping me going and pushing me, because you have. And thank you for, I know you got a very, crunch time schedule. So I thank you for carving out a little bit of time to spend with me and everybody listening here. It means a lot to us.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to come and kind of share my story. I always enjoy doing these types of collaborations with you, because I know that your heart is in the right place, and I know that we share more commonalities than we do differences, And so it's always a pleasure to be able to hop on here with you and kind of, just speak my truth.
I'll have to eventually find what those differences are. They're somewhere in there.
I know, they will be there somewhere. So,
there gotta be something we don't align on.
yeah.
Thank you so much again, Keenan. I really appreciate it. For all of you listening, I hope you've enjoyed this as well. If you have, I encourage you greatly to subscribe, follow whatever platform you're currently listening on. That's how we make this have more impact. That's how we get bigger. That's how we get more messages that are important to you and to us in front of more people. So it means a lot to myself. I know it means a lot to all the guests that I have on here, like this lovely gentleman in front of me right now. Thank you so much for listening. Lastly, go out there and do the hard work that you need to do to make yourself happy. Thank you so much.